Hi everyone, welcome to the Pro Insight video series. I'm Matthew.
And I'm Nader. We are here to tackle real-world career challenges and share practical insights.
Each episode, we'll dive into important topics to help you navigate your professional journey.
Let's get started and help you thrive in your career. All right, everybody, welcome back to Aspire Pro Insights for another video and another subject that we're going to discuss together here. Again, before we start, I want to thank you for checking out our website. Thank you for your subscription, and thank you for being a valued member for Aspire Career Services. I'm joined today by Matt Rowe.
Hello.
Our lead mentor and co-owner here at Aspire as well. And today's subject is handling disagreements in the workplace. Big subject, guys, and this is something that we wanted to create a Pro Insight video about because how important it is and how often sometimes it happens at the workplace. So hopefully we'll be able to give you some good insights today. Will be highly impactful and useful for you. So we're just gonna dive right in right here. Welcome, Matt.
Hello.
And thank you for helping us answer some of the questions about handling disagreements in the workplace.
Absolutely.
I know that you also
I'm excited to talk about it.
Are very excited as well. Big subject. Happens sometimes or sometimes a lot in the workplace. And we want to ask you some questions about it. Maybe you can help us out right here.
Sure.
A little bit. So the first question is what are some common reasons for disagreement in the workplace to happen? And how can they be identified early on?
So common disagreements, I think, can translate really well to common miscommunications. Oftentimes that's a majority of what disagreements are, is just simply the communication that was given from one person wasn't received correctly by the other person. Or there are emotions or feelings that are attached to maybe prior experiences or prior interactions with that person that they're holding on to. So now they're looking through the lens of those emotions in every interaction they have with that person,
like the history.
Yep. So we're creatures of habit, but we're fast learners. So we learn to adapt to what we experience. And so what happens is that if we get a consistent experience every time that we communicate with one person, we start to learn to expect that when we communicate with them. And often that can hinder our communication, things like that. But I will tell you that the most common things that cause the disagreements is just honestly lack of relationship. And that's really what it comes down to, is that either one or both parties don't understand each other to the fullest extent, or they haven't taken the time to really. And where you can kind of see it early on is if you're having trouble connecting with the person, if you're having trouble understanding them, if you're having trouble relating to them or finding common ground, if you find yourself in that headspace where you have anxiety when you're around the person, then I think that that's a really good indicator that you're probably going to be hesitant to get to know that person more, and it's ultimately going to lead to conflicts.
I see.
It always does.
Okay. So different personalities, different people, different behaviors. And of course, sometimes we assume the worst, sometimes we assume the good about the person in front of us. So hopefully you'll be able to help us identify this as well in the next few questions. So the next question is how can someone effectively communicate their perspective during a disagreement without escalating the conflict? And it's a very important question to answer, to be honest, because we want to know how to express ourselves and what our perspectives are, what our opinions are, and the way that we view the situation, but without escalating the conflict. How can we do that, sir?
Once again, I'm going to bring up the big E word, emotions. Separating the emotions out is very critical. It's very hard to do, though. And once again, it goes back to the relationship. You often hear these stories about people that are really good friends, and they often have a story of where when they first met, they hated each other, or when they first met, they had this big blow up or this big conflict, and then they love telling the story because that's how the relationship started, because really that was the propellant or the thing that caused them to realize, I need to get to know this person better. I need to build a deeper connection, a better relationship with them. So when you're in the moment like that, the first thing to recognize is that it's often happening because of the lack of relationship. So just put that in context, but then you have to, because of that, you have to separate the emotion. Meaning, ask yourself the question of, okay, take a deep breath. What emotion am I feeling right now? What emotion am I associating with this conflict? And how do I separate that? And what I mean by separating is not excluding it, but separating it from the conversation that's happening. And let me give you an example. I can communicate an emotion without expressing an emotion, right? Like I can say, "Hey, Nader, the other day, whenever you were talking to me," and I'm just making this up, by the way, maybe, I don't know. The other day when you were talking to me, you said X, Y, and Z, and that made me feel really frustrated. So if you notice, I communicated the emotion versus if I said, "Nader, the other day when you were talking to me, oh my gosh, it was frustrating, man. I don't understand. Like, why did you have to communicate that way? Like, why? That's so frustrating."
That's so important.
And you can see where in that second scenario, I'm expressing that emotion versus communicating the emotion. So that's what I mean by separating the emotion is recognize what that emotion is, and then what I mean by separate it is actually just communicate it without expressing it. That's critical.
That is an amazing point made by you, Matt, right here. Because I will tell you that I've been in situations before that I approached the conversation or I tried to communicate my perspective, but I was so frustrated.
Yes.
And it highly escalated the conflict. I will say I escalated it, but at the same time, the other person immediately got in defense mode because they felt that I was attacking them. Because you're right, I did not separate that feeling of frustration rather than communicate it. So great point.
And I will tell you this is that we don't give each other credit enough with how intelligent our brains are. Meaning when we're expressing emotion, the other person can pick up on it immediately. And what it triggers is it triggers that same part in their brain. So there's two different parts in your brain that handle, logic. One handles logic and the other one handles emotion. So your frontal lobe handles that logic and that reasoning, and then your your limbic system handles the emotions. And so what happens is that when I'm sitting across from someone else, if they're experiencing an emotion and they're expressing that emotion, what happens is that it triggers my limbic system. And now I'm thinking, okay, how do I react to that? What do I need to do? How should I feel? Should I become defensive? Should I lean in? What is it? It triggers my limbic system. And now I'm starting to use logic less. That's why whenever you see an argument that escalates, maybe it's a spouse or a significant other or whatever, and you're both emotional, you can't have a rational conversation because you're both emotional, and it's hard for one person to let go of their emotions because the other person's emotion is constantly, for lack of better words, triggering it. And so that's what's critical to understand is that if you start expressing those emotions, it's going to ultimately trigger them to start expressing emotions. And then the conversation is going to become less and less productive.
I see.
So it's not that you can't have those feelings. You're allowed to have the feelings. It's okay. But you have to learn to communicate them rather than express them. And I think that's the biggest tactic or the main point whenever you're trying to have a productive conversation about conflict.
Definitely. Thank you, sir, for an amazing answer. And it all makes sense for all of us. And I can think of many examples that happened with me in the past as well. And you probably guys can think of many examples that happened with you. And definitely huge difference between expressing the feeling and communicating it that way.
Just we're not taught to communicate our feelings. Right? We're taught to suppress our feelings. And therefore we're never taught to communicate our feelings, right?
Absolutely.
And it's just, once again, with practice. And there's another reason you should sign up for mentoring services or leadership services with us, where you get to sit one-on-one with us. We will practice this and walk through this with you, meaning we'll rehash old things that happened, and we'll practice you communicating those things and communicating your emotions with us rather than expressing them.
Absolutely. Thank you, sir. All right, Matt, that brings us to our third question.
Okay.
Under that subject of handling disagreements in the workplace. And what we really want to know right now is, we always hear this statement of like, put yourself in the other person's shoes, put yourself in the
Yes.
other person's shoes. And we don't know how to do it sometimes, or maybe most of the time. So we want to ask you, like, what role does empathy play in resolving work disagreements, and how can it be applied in practice?
Yeah, definitely. So I always am a big proponent of authentic empathy.
Hmm.
And the key word there is authentic. You can't fake it.
Hmm.
And that's where it's critical to, once again, separate your emotions, meaning put them in the correct context so that way you can actually look through the lens of the other person and be able to have empathy. And the kind of the common rule I use is by asking myself one phrase, which is, can I relate? If so, then how?
Hmm.
And whenever I say, can I relate? And if so, then how? I'm thinking back to previous things that have happened to me in my life,
Hmm.
and maybe a similar situation where I was in their shoes.
Hmm.
And what I'm doing is I'm relating, thinking about the feelings that I felt, right?
Hmm.
The experiences that I went through, the challenges that I was faced with. And it always helps give me a strong perspective on perhaps what they're feeling and thinking. And the role that it can play, honestly, is not just putting yourself in their shoes, but communicating that.
Hmm.
And that is something that was grossly misunderused in a conflict, is that we're so afraid to say something, um, I guess, nice, because we're
Hmm.
in a conflict,
Yeah.
and we're afraid that it'll come across as weakness, or that we won't get our point across, or they'll feel like they've won, or all these silly things, when in reality it can actually help resolve the conflict just simply by saying, listen,
Hmm.
I know what you're saying, and I understand where you're coming from,
Hmm.
and I've been in a similar situation, and you don't have to go in great detail, but you can say in the past I've been in a very similar situation, and I was just thinking about it, and you know what, I could definitely understand what you're going through, and I felt very similarly when I went through it. So let's find some common ground. Let's find a middle ground for us.
Oh, this makes all the sense. I think, and I don't know about you guys, but 90% of the disagreements that I've been in before, my intention really was not to resolve the agreement.
No,
It was to win, is to go
get
in
your
and
point
prove
across.
my point. Yeah,
Yeah,
I want to tell that person is like, no, I'm right and you're wrong.
correct.
And that was my purpose of that conversation. But you saying that made me really realize that probably, I don't know about you guys, but 90% of the disagreements that I've had in the past, up until to this point, it was to just prove a point that I'm
Correct.
right. It wasn't actually to resolve it.
Yeah, there was I don't remember where I saw it or where I heard it from, but there was a situation where there was a daughter and her mother, and they had this strenuous relationship of conflict, and they were constantly in conflict.
Hmm.
And she was talking about how one Thanksgiving everything changed for her and her mother, because
Hmm.
her brother pulled her to the side, and with tears in his eyes, he looked at her and said, do you want to be right, or do you want a relationship with your mom?
Hmm.
and he gave her two options. Do you want to be right, or do you want a relationship? You can't have both.
Hmm.
You have to choose. Which one do you want?
Hmm.
Do you want a relationship, or do you want to be right? Because the truth is that we're all often right.
Yeah.
Right, we all have our own way of thinking, our own perspective, and in
Yeah.
our world we're correct. um, But if that's what's driving and motivating us, like you're talking about,
Hmm.
we're going to constantly run into conflict. It's never going to be resolved. But instead, if you value the relationship over being right, you're going to find a way to have a common ground or a middle
Absolutely.
ground.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, sir, for answering
Yep.
these questions for us. And I hope this has been helpful for everybody right here, guys, to see how to handle disagreements in the workplace, how to find steps to apply empathy, how to look at it from a standpoint of the other person as a human being. And thank you guys for joining us for another Pro Insight video right here. I will encourage you to keep going and keep checking the Pro Insights subscription under your subscription with Aspire. And we are so happy that we're doing these videos with you guys. Please tell your friends, tell your family members about Aspire Career Services. We are looking forward to provide a lot of value. And stay tuned, guys, for more pro insights.
Thank you, guys.
And have a great day.
Bye. Thank you for watching this episode of the Pro Insight video series. We hope you found it valuable and insightful. Don't forget to join us next week for a new topic and more expert advice. Stay tuned, stay inspired, and keep thriving in your career. Aspire Career Services, LLC, guiding careers, cultivating leaders.